Previously on the plantation. Lenin and the communists were not just planning to take Russia, but the United States as well. Stalin had plans for Africans and Black Americans. It was called the Negro Question. Communists also made efforts to hijack the American Civil Rights Movement. As early as the late 1920s, the Communist Workers' Party of America believed there would be great potential for revolution among Black Americans.
To use the Negro people in this country as cannon fodder in a violent and bloody revolution aimed at the establishment of the American Soviet dictatorship.
It's easy for me to recognize this revolutionary agitation in disguise.
We were taught how to use propaganda and arouse the emotion of the masses. We learned how to set one group against the other and to make them hate each other.
Non-violent phase of revolution actually is more important to the communists and more potentially dangerous to us. Now, the strategy for this phase calls for the gradual transition of our government into a communist regime, done peacefully and legally, but under the banner of socialism. In other words, simply stated, we're living in an era of two kinds of revolution, one violent and the other non-violent.
Not all communists seen the truth for what it was. A young Black poet and writer named Frank Marshall Davis was that guy. Frank wrote flyers and propaganda for the communists. The encyclopedia on Davis forgot to mention sex rebel or being a hardcore communist. But it did mention the almost 700 pages of FBI files. According to unclassified FBI documents, Frank was a lecturer and teacher for the young communists. There was almost 700 pages of his communist activities. From teaching young communists to holding cocktail parties for head communists. Frank was also a recruiter for the Communist Party. Frank loaded up and headed to Hawaii to work for Honolulu Record, a communist propaganda machine. Koji Hiroshi offered Frank a new assignment. Hiroshi was trained with the communists. He was a psychological warfare expert. Stanley Dunham and his wife, Madeline, moved from Washington to Honolulu. They had one daughter named Ann Dunham. Ann had a little boy named Barry Soetoro, also known as Barack Obama. Barack's maternal father was from Kenya. He was absent. Obama Sr. was actually a socialist. Ann was too busy being an anthropologist, no time for Barack. Barack Obama needed a mentor. So his grandfather asked his best friend, card-carrying communist Frank Marshall Davis, to be that mentor. Obama had got his first assignment.
Gotten out of college, and I was at Columbia University in New York, and Harold Washington had just been elected in 1983, and I was very much interested in seeing what could be done in terms of the inner city, what the possibilities were for progressive politics in the Black community, and Chicago was the most exciting thing going on at the time. So I hooked up with a church-based community organization out in the far south side called Developing Communities Project, and ended up directing their organizing efforts for about 4 years, I guess.
Obama's boss, Jerry Kilman, was mentored by Saul Alinsky.
My main concern was why he might want to do this work, and so I spent the time listening to his story. Well, I heard that he had lived his life as an outsider, and maybe conceived himself that way. He had been African-American, or at least part African-American, in a place, Hawaii. There were very few people who were Black. And when you have that experience, either you try to be like everybody else, or you identify with other outsiders. In Barack's case, I felt he identified with other outsiders, and that was a good start for working with people who were poor and facing racial discrimination.
Base of operations was on the south side of Chicago, Davis's old stomping ground. In this part, Obama and the communists don't want you to see Jerry Kelman and Mike Kruglich speak about Alinsky's influence on young Obama. But let's speak about some other things. According to John True, an Obama Occidental classmate and fellow communist said Obama was a hardcore communist. Collazo was Obama's supervisor. Collazo run a communist front group called UNO. Nope, not the card game. This was the commie game. The man was Saul Alinsky, a radical activist who wrote books, taught students, and personally oversaw the implementations of theories, eventually becoming the para-communist agitator with the most menacing influence for decades. Aside from his worship of Lenin and Castro, Alinsky also explicitly praised the devil himself. In his book, Rules for Radicals, one of the epigraphs says, "Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical from all of our legends, mythology, and history. And who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which? The first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did so efficiently that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. Unlike the old left of the 1930s and the new left of the 1960s, Alinsky refused to affirmatively describe his political ideals. His overall view was that the world has the haves, the have a little want mores, and the have-nots. He called upon the have-nots to rebel against the haves by any means and to seize wealth and power. In order to achieve a completely and equal society, he sought to seize power through any means, while at the same time destroying the existence of the social system. He has been called the Lenin of the post-communist left, and it's Sun Tzu. In Rules for Radicals, published in 1971, Alinsky systematically set forth his theory and methods of community organizing. These rules included a tactic that drags on too long becomes a drag. Keep the pressure on. The threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. Ridicule is man's most potent weapon, and pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. The essence of his rules was about using immoral means to achieve his goals and gain power. When the Vietnam War was still in progress in 1972, George H.W. Bush, then U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, gave a speech at Tulane University. Students at the university who were against the war sought advice from Alinsky, who said that protesting with the usual methods would likely result simply in them being expelled. He thus suggested that they don Ku Klux Klan garb, and whenever Bush defended the Vietnam War, they'd stand up with placards and say the KKK supports Bush. The students did so with very successful attention-getting results. Alinsky and his followers were delighted. With two other protests he planned in 1964, the negotiations with Chicago city authorities. Alinsky concocted the plan of organizing 2,500 activists to occupy the toilets in Chicago's O'Hare International Airport, one of the busiest in the world, to force its operations to grind to a halt. Prior to actually carrying off the plan, he leaked the plan, this forcing the authorities to negotiate. In order to force Kodak, the major employer in Rochester, New York, to increase the ratio of black employees to white, Alinsky came up with a similar tactic, seizing an important cultural tradition in the city, an upcoming performance of Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. Alinsky planned to purchase hundreds of tickets for his activists and fed them baked beans beforehand so they could fill the theater and ruin the performance with flatulence. This episode didn't come to fruition, but the threat of it, as well as Alinsky's other tactics, enhanced his position in negotiations. Alinsky's book leaves the impression of a sinister, cold, and calculated individual. His use of community organizing was really a form of gradual revolution. When he conducted training for community organizing, he would routinely ask the trainees, why organize? Some would say that it was to help others. But Alinsky would roar back, you want to organize for power. In the training manual the Alinsky followers went by, it said, we are not virtuous, by not wanting power. We are really cowards for not wanting power. And power is good. Powerlessness is evil. Second, Alinsky didn't think much of the rebellious youth of the 1960s, who were publicly against the government and society. He stressed that whenever possible, one should enter the system, while biding time for opportunity to subvert it from within. Third, Alinsky's ultimate goal was to subvert and destroy, not to benefit any group. Thus, implementation, his plan, it was necessary to conceal the real purpose with localized or staged goals that were seemingly responsible or harmless by themselves. To mobilize large crowds to action. A leader from Students for a Democrat Society, who was deeply influenced by Alinsky, nailed the essence of radicalizing protests. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. The radical left after the 60s was deeply influenced by Alinsky and always turned the response to any social issue into dissatisfaction with the status quo overall as its stepping stone to advancing the revolutionary cause. It is important to note that in one of his introductory pages for Rules for Radicals, Alinsky gave his acknowledgement to the first radical Lucifer. Furthermore, in an interview with Playboy magazine, shortly before the death, Alinsky said that when he died, he would unreservedly choose to go to hell and begin to organize the proletariat there because they were my kind of people. After DSOC and NAM, they merged to become the DSA, the Democrat Socialist of America. Obama was a member of the Communist Front Group. Obama then decided to take the long march through the institutions. This was the communist tactics of infiltration. It was Antonio Gramsci, a prominent Italian communist who promoted the idea of carrying out the long march through the institutions. He found that it's difficult to incite people of faith, to initiate a revolution, to overthrow a legitimate government, and so in order to bring a revolution, communists rely on large numbers of foot soldiers who share their dark visions of morality, faith, and traditions. The revolution of the proletariat then must begin with the subversion of religion, morality, and civilization. After the failure of the street revolutions in the 1960s, the rebels began entering academia. They attained degrees, became scholars, professors, government officials, and journalists, and entered the mainstream of society to carry off the long march through the institutions. This, they infiltrated and corrupted the institutions of Western society. This includes the church, the government, the education system, the legislative and judicial bodies, the art world, the media, and NGOs. The United Nations since the 1960s have been like a patient with an affliction who cannot identify the cause. Marx's ideas have seeped deep into American society and have been metastasizing. The origin of the demonic growth was Karl Marx. Before I get into his real history, here is a globalist propaganda piece on Marx.
Karl Marx is often described as one of the greatest thinkers of the 19th century. His writings have inspired revolutions and generated centuries of fierce debate. Born in Prussia, now Germany, in May 1818, Marx believed that capitalism, which was in its infancy at the time, had serious flaws. Marx claimed that in pursuit of profit, capitalists would encourage their ideology that work is good, leisure is bad, and material things will make us happy, embracing mass production, depriving workers of job satisfaction, at the same time exploiting the working class. He became involved in the Communist League, a small group of intellectuals who wanted to abolish the class system and spread wealth equally. Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1847 with his benefactor Friedrich Engels, laying out the Marxist vision of a society where wealth is distributed evenly. Property is owned publicly, and education is free for all. But Marx was little known and little read at the time. When he died in 1883, only 11 people attended his funeral. After his death, his ideas flourished. Based on the theory of Marxism came communism, the realization of a stateless society where all are equal.
It was Karl Marx who created an ideology to encompass the deception in all its permutation. And it was Vladimir Lenin who put the theory into brutal practice. Marx, however, was not an atheist. He followed the devil's cult and became the demon whose mission was to prevent man from recognizing the creator in the end times. Marx published many books throughout his life, the best known being the 1848 Communist Manifesto and the 3 volumes of Das Kapital, published between 1867 and 1894. These works formed the theoretical basis for the communist movement. What is less widely known is that Marx's life was a process in which he turned over his soul to the devil and became its agents in the human realm. In his youth, Marx had been a devout Christian. He was an enthusiastic believer in God before being overcome by his demonic transformation. In his early poem, Invocation of One in Despair, Marx wrote in his intent to take revenge on God. Writing to his father, Marx described the changes he was experiencing. In his poem, The Pale Maiden, Karl Marx wrote, Marx's family clearly noticed his change. On March 2nd, 1837, his father wrote to him, "Your advancement, the dear hope of seeing your name someday of great repute, and your earthly well-being are not the only desires of my heart. These are illusions I had for a long time, but I can assure you that their fulfillment would not have made me happy. Only if your heart remains and beats humanly, and if no demon is able to alienate your heart from better feelings, only then will I be happy." One of Marx's daughters wrote that when she was young, Marx told her and her sisters many fairy tales. Her favorite was the meandering story of Hans Rockle, the wizard who was always short of cash and had no choice but to sell off his lovely puppets to the devil. What Marx sold to the devil in exchange for his success was his own soul. Describing himself in The Fiddler, Marx wrote, biography, Marx author Robert Payne wrote that the story Marx told might be taken as allegory for his own life, and that seemed to be knowingly acting on the devil's behalf. Marx's soul turned to evil. In his rage against God, he joined the devil's cult. The American political philosopher Eric Voegelin wrote Marx knew that he was a God creating a world. He did not want to be a creature. He did not want to see the world in the perspective of a creaturely existence. He wanted to see the world from the point of a coincidentia oppositorium, that is from the position of God. In his poem, Human Pride, Marx expressed his will to break away from God and stand with them at equal footing. Marx actively rebelled against the divine. Soon after Marx died, his housemaid Helen Demuth said of him, "He was a God-fearing man. When very sick, he prayed alone in his room before a row of lighted candles, tying a sort of tape measure around his forehead." Marx's prayers, as scholars have said, was neither Christian nor Jewish, but the real Marx was not atheist. The Communist Manifesto begins, "A specter is haunting Europe, a specter of communism." The use of this term specter was not a whim of Karl Marx. The preface of his book argues that communism should not be understood as being an ideological movement, a political doctrine, or a failed attempt at a new way of ordering human affairs. Instead, it should be understood as being a devil, an evil specter, forged by hate, degeneracy, and other elemental forces in the universe or high places. The Communist Spector took the form of a serpent, then that of a red dragon, and it keeps company with Satan, who hates God and exploits low-level beings and demons to wreak havoc on man. The goal of the Spectre is to ruin humanity. The idea of the devil being referred to in this text is that of being of a supernatural power. Understanding the type that is the Spector of Communism is one of the keys of understanding the chaos the devil has sown in the world. Simply put, the Spector of Communism is composed of hate. It draws its energy from the hatred that wells up in the human heart. The Communist Spector is tied to Satan. Sometimes the two are indistinguishable. Thus, we will not make an effort to consider them separately. The devil's arrangements are present in both the East and West, in every profession and every walk of life. Sometimes its powers is divided, sometimes integrated, sometimes it uses the tactic, sometimes that. It follows no simple pattern. The devil is the initiator of the unrestricted war on mankind that has turned religion, the family, politics, the economy, finance, military affairs, education, the academy, the arts, the media, and entertainment, popular culture, social affairs, and international relations all into battlefields. The dark energy of the devil can spread from one sphere, group, or movement to another. At the core of the evil specter is atheism and materialism, a confluence of elements from German philosophy, French social revolution, and British political economy assembled as a secular religion meant to replace the position previously occupied by God and Orthodox beliefs. Communism turns the world into its church, bringing all aspects of social life under its purview. The devil chose Marx and others as its agents to oppose and destroy the principles laid down by God for human society. Just as the devil goes by many names, communists manifest in many ways. Demon uses contradictory positions to deceive. A totalitarian regime or a democracy, a planned economy or a market economy, control of the press or no restraints whatsoever on speech, opposition to homosexuality in some countries or legalization of homosexuality in other countries, wanton environmental destruction or clamor for environmental protection, and so on. It can advocate violent revolution or embrace peaceful transition. It may manifest as a political and economic system, or as an ideological trend in art and culture. It may take the form of pure idolism and cold-blooded scheming. Communist totalitarian regimes are not just one of the demon's manifestations. Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism form just one aspect of the devil's fallacies. The demon of communism inhabits a variety of complex guises in the West and operates under many banners, making it almost impossible to guard against. The following schools or movements were either derived from communism or used by communism to reach its ends. Liberalism, progressivism, the Frankfurt School, neo-Marxism, critical theory, the counterculture of the 1960s, the anti-war movement, sexual liberation, legalization of homosexuality, feminism, environmentalism, social justice, political correctness, Keynesian economics, avant-garde art schools, and multiculturalism. Devil chose Marx and others as its agents to oppose and destroy the principles laid down by God for human society. It promotes class struggle and the abolition of established social structures. In the East, it launched a violent revolution and established a totalitarian state that united politics and secular religion. In the West, it undertakes progressivism, nonviolent communism through high levels of taxation and wealth distribution on a worldwide scale. It seeks to spread communist ideologies to political systems everywhere with the goal of undermining nation states and establishing a global whirling body. This is the paradise on earth promised in communism, a supposed collective society without class, nations, or government, based on the principles of from each according to his ability and to each according to his need. God is the source of moral order, and God's morality is eternal and unchanging. Moral standards should never be determined by man, nor can they be changed by man's power. Communist tries to sentence morality to death, and to have the communist new man established a new morality. Marx and communism never brought paradise, brought nothing but hell on earth. The Devil and Karl Marx by Paul Kengor. This book was the source of much of the research in this section. This Jordan Peterson interview with Paul Kengor is very important to understanding Karl Marx's demonic possession and character.
I have the privilege of speaking with Paul Kengor today. He's written a book, many books. One of them is, for example, The Crusader, Ronald Reagan, and the Fall of Communism. This is going to be made into a movie. I just interviewed the lead actor for that movie a couple of weeks ago, Dennis Quaid. And so that'll be releasing, the movie will be releasing at the end of August. Paul is also the editor of the American Spectator, and this month's version has a list of the best conservative colleges in the United States. And so that could be a very helpful list for those of you who are thinking about going to college or who have children who are thinking about going to college. So that's the American Spectator. And so, but what we're concentrating on today is actually a different book, The Devil and Karl Marx. And I really like this book, not least because it delves into Karl Marx's work as a poet and a playwright. And it sheds light, I think, on the underlying structure of his motivation for the so-called economic theories that he developed later. And so we discuss the Mephistophelian nature of the fantasies, the poetic fantasies that Karl Marx developed as a young man, and how that ethos, that Faustian ethos, what would you say, shaped and crafted the murderous doctrine that he developed as a polemicist and a so-called economist. So join us for that.
So this is quite fascinating. I think you should write the next foreword. The foreword for this one was written by Michael Knowles, a colleague of yours at Daily Wire. So Marx fancied himself a poet. Mm-hmm. I mean, Marx's secret love was poetry. In fact, one of his, I think, his most important biographer, and this guy has been, it's kind of fallen, people just don't know about him today. No one had anything against him really, but his name was Robert Paine. So he was a British academic, man of letters, the arts, a translator, drama. I mean, he was no right-winger. He was probably slightly left of center. Mm. He did several works on Marx, late 60s, early 1970s. Yeah. Published by New York University Press, Simon & Schuster, so, very credible. And he was really the first one to mine Marx's poetry, to go through and figure it out.
How much of it is there? How much poetry?
Well, there's quite a bit, and it's deeply disturbing stuff. All right, a lot of it is about the devil, and quite literally about the devil. It's chilling, right? Thus heaven I forfeited. I know it full well. My heart, once true to God, is chosen for hell.
Right.
1837.
Straight Lucifer from Milton.
Yeah, 1837, that one was. It was one of his first published writings. He would have only been 19 years old at that time. Another one, so it's called The Player, and it was 1841. And here he puts himself, it appears, in the form of this kind of mad violinist who's like frenetically, maniacally sawing away at the violin, and he's summoning up the powers of darkness, and he's doing this in front of his love interest. And the love interest,
one does.
Yeah, right. And the love interest, Robert Payne says, appears to be his girl at the time, Jenny, the girl that he would end up marrying. And he's summoning up the powers of darkness, and she's saying, why are you doing this to him? It's like a Faustian bargain, more in Faust and Goethe and Mephistopheles in a moment. But just to sort of set the table for people who are shocked by what I said about him writing about the devil. So here's what he says in The Player. Here's just one stanza. He tells the girl, look now, my blood-dark sword shall stab unerringly within thy soul. The hellish vapors rise and fill the brain, till I go mad and my heart is utterly changed. See the sword, the prince of darkness sold it to me. For he beats the time and gives the signs. Ever more boldly I play the dance of death. In the poems, Marx shouts in the form of Satan, right? I shall howl gigantic curses at mankind. And Robert Payne says, picture Marx standing there in the middle of like a burned down village, a burnt down house, right? The raised REZED building, and flames all around him. Everything that exists deserves to perish, and as if to say, now we can begin, right? He wants to take everything down. He wants to completely level it. And yet all of this, going back to your original point, this is what he was writing before he was doing anything on economics.
Right.
Before he was doing, and also yet at the same time, because I know there might be some Marx biographers who've ignored this. I know that they've ignored it. And they might say, well, it's so early. He did this as one of his first published writings, 1837. He was 19 years old. That's not the real Marx. Well, the one I just read to you, The Player, that's 1841. That was the same year that he started with Bruno Baur at the University of Bonn as professor of the Archives of Atheism, the Annals of Atheism journal that he started. His peak of writing was really in the 1840s. I mean, they were writing the Communist Manifesto, 1846, 1847, released February 1848. So it's
not that long.
It's not that long.
Well, the other thing too
happened between those teenage years and college years are really flipped him. The best that I can determine, he came under the influence of a professor in college named Dr.
Fancy that.
Yeah, right, exactly. Imagine that. Named Dr. Bruno Baur, University of Bonn. And he was a professor of theology who was an atheist, right? Imagine that, just like the colleges today. He's eventually run out of the university. But he and Marx became very tight, very close. Interestingly, too, Bruno Baur was intensely anti-Semitic. So close that they together, so Baur influences Marx's atheism. They start a journal together called Annals of Atheism, which never gets off the ground, partly because they don't have money to support it. I guess they couldn't find a wealthy atheist socialist who could help them out. So they start this archives of this Annals of Atheism. And then Baur's eventually fired from the university. He's pushed out of the university. And he and Marx pulled a couple stunts. In one case, they went to a nearby village for Palm Sunday and rode in on donkeys together, kind of mocking the entrance of Christ into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday.
Mocking or imitating.
Yeah.
Right. Well, you have the same weird dichotomy there with the character in the play that you described. It's like, are you mocking or usurping? That's a better metaphor.
Good.
Yes,
right,
absolutely.
Right.
Well, because Lucifer
I don't like the word channeling that people use today, but that might
usurping is good because Lucifer's a usurper. right?
True.
I mean, he's the spirit that wants to overthrow everything and put himself at the top. And not just himself, but his intellect specifically.
Yes.
And that's very reminiscent of the way Marx conducted himself in his life, right? Everything around him, including his family, his wife, his friends, everything was sacrificed to the glorification of his intellect.
Right.
In this,
Right.
and like, well, and this is exactly what happens in the Faustian bargain, right? I mean, Faust essentially sells his soul for what would you say? Intellectual supremacy.
In one case, he's like jury and executioner, right?
Right.
And I shall howl
Supreme judge.
curses at mankind. And in the mockery, it's a good point. I mean, because the devil hates to be mocked, but the devil mocks Christ. The devil mocks God, right? And in Marx's case, so they're imitating or mocking the Christ entering Jerusalem. They would go into churches together, he and Bruno Baur, and laugh and kind of make noise in the pew, just to be disrespectful. So
it's easy to imagine that, well, maybe that professor paid a lot of attention to him.
I think so. And the professor's anti-Semitic, and which is odd. And Marx is Jewish, and Marx ends up with some very anti-Semitic statements. He said, "The Israelite faith is repulsive to me." And he has this one statement where he talks about, in the end, the final emancipation, the emancipation of the, it sounds like something Hitler could have said. I mean, some really disturbing statements about Jews.
Tell me about the emancipation?
Yeah, I'll get that exact quote.
Okay.
I'll get that. I did a piece called Marx on Judaism, Christianity, and Evolution Race. If you look that up, it has that quote on the Jewish.
Okay. So we don't know why he turned to atheism. These poems that he wrote that were pans to Mephistopheles, is that after he becomes an atheist?
No, he's writing, so the first one was 1837, wrote another in 1841. He wrote a bunch of them.
Right.
He did just a chilling play called Ulanem.
Yes.
Oulanem. And people that are watching this, if they now type into their computer Ulanem, even in Google, it'll pop up, play by Karl Marx.
Yeah.
It even has a Wikipedia entry. And let me warn people, you might not want to do this, but if you click the images button, you will see, there's some satanic stuff up there from like, not heavy metal, but like black metal groups. So Ulanem is an anagram for Emmanuel or Emmanuello.
Right.
So Marx takes Emmanuel, which is the name given to Christ, or Emmanuello, and he flips it into this anagram called Ulanem. And it's this chilling play. The main character is Lucindo, Lucindo, and you just can't believe what you're reading with this play. So that was written later in the 1840s. So really the prime of his writing, including the decade when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, is also the same decade when he was writing these poems.
And plays.
And throughout his life, his kids and others would say, he had a favorite line always from Mephistopheles.
Right.
Everything that exists deserves to perish. So that remains a part of him throughout his life. His son, Edgar, has a letter where he addresses his father as "my dear devil," which, I don't know, maybe it's playful, I don't know.
Yeah.
Although I would never, call my dad "my dear devil." His wife called him "my wicked knave." I quote Henrik Heinzen, referring to him as a goblin who tried to take me under his spell. Other cases of where he's using that kind of language. When Engels first met him, he describes him as this dark man from Trier, who hops and leaps and springs on his heels, the monster of 10,000 devils. Letter from his father is, which was written in 1837, a year before his father died. So his father writes to him, March 2nd, 1837. "Karl, at times my heart delights in thinking of you and your fortune, and yet at times I cannot rid myself of ideas which arouse in me sad forebodings and fear when I am struck, as if by lightning, by the thought, is your heart in accord with your head, your talents? Has there room for the earthly but gentler sentiments which in this vale of sorrow," it's a beautiful letter in many ways, are essentially consoling for a man of feeling. And then this question from the father of Karl Marx to his at this point, 18-year-old son. And since that heart, Karl, is obviously animated and governed by a demon, not granted to all men, is that demon heavenly or Faustian? Will you ever, and that is not the least painful doubt of my heart, will you ever be capable of truly human domestic happiness? Will, and this doubt has no less tortured me since I have come to love a certain person like my own child, will you ever be capable of imparting happiness to those immediately around you? By the way, the answer was no, right?
Well,
but that
obviously
phrase,
the father
and
had intimations of that.
yeah, and since that heart is obviously animated and governed by a demon not granted to all men, is that demon heavenly or Faustian?
Right,
That's his dad.
Yeah.
And there's only so many of those things I think that a sympathetic Marxist or Marxist biographer can shrug off. I mean, there's just so many statements like that from him and people about him and people who knew him and loved ones and a wife, a son, a best friend from Engels, and then the different writings. Whew.
Okay, so
Robert Payne, the very serious academic, no right-winger, British man of letters, the guy who really broke this first in his 1968 biography of Marx, all right? His chapter where he talks about this stuff is called The Demons in his Marx biography. Now, he wrote this, and I'm not saying that I endorse this. As an academic, I can't say if this is correct. There were times when Marx seemed to be possessed by demons. That's what Payne wrote. And now this I would at least more endorse. Marx had the devil's view of the world and the devil's malignity. Sometimes he seemed to know that he was accomplishing works of evil. I think that gets closer to it. He was born May 5th, 1818 in Trier. He was baptized in 1824. Now, he's a Jew. The family, he comes from a very Jewish family, not just in terms of ethnicity, but Judaism. They are religious Jews. They're Orthodox Jews. A bunch of rabbis in the family. His father had converted to Christianity, to Lutheranism specifically, Heinrich Marx. And some say that he did because of social pressures in Germany in the day, like anti-Semitism, and perhaps so, maybe. He had an uncle who converted to Roman Catholicism, which most people there did because it was like 90% Roman Catholic. But Marx's father converted to Lutheranism, and Marx's father died a believer, right? Probably kind of a more liberal Christian, but he was a Christian. So Marx converts, Marx is baptized 1824, who would have been 5 or 6 years old. His mother really didn't want him to, the mother really didn't want to convert, but Marx is a fairly dedicated Christian through his teenage years, and he really doesn't start to change until college. So he's born May 5th, 1818, in Trier, Germany. Trier is spelled like Trier, T-R-I-E-R. A very religious city.
Right.
I mean, like 90% Roman Catholic. The great cathedral of Trier was founded around the year 320, 330. It was paid for by Saint Helena, the mother of Constantine, of all people, right?
Oh, really? So it's that early?
Yeah, exactly. That early.
Oh, wow.
And so, and by the way, it is also the birth town of Saint Ambrose, who was the bishop of Milan later, who brought Augustine into the faith. So Ambrose and Marx are both from Trier, Germany, of all things. So you have this cathedral in Trier. St. Helena is the one that goes to the Holy Land and brings back all kinds of relics, all right? In fact, she believes that she found the Holy Lance, which is pierced the side of Christ, and that is at the Vatican today. She believes, the crown of thorns, which is in Notre Dame. She believed that she found the holy robe that Jesus wore at the crucifixion that the Roman soldiers cast lots for at the foot of the cross. The holy robe is in that cathedral in Trier. By the way, Marx, in his 1841 poem, The Player, right, which is actually a play, because you mentioned drama. A lot of these plays are actually dramas as well. His demonic violinist who's summoning up the powers of darkness. Marx not only wrote the character and the words, he also wrote the stage, the production, the furniture on the stage, the clothes people would wear. The violinist is wearing the holy robe of Christ. from the cathedral in Trier while he's summoning up. I mean, chilling.
Wow.
Chilling of all things. But so many of these biographers ignore faith. So in Marx's case, I'm one of the only ones that really cared, right? A lot of the Marx biographers are leftists. So
yes, of course.
So they ignore all of this stuff. I'm getting off track.
No, that's okay.
The first main Marx biographer, Franz Mehring, this would have been over 100 years ago, was the first to discover the demonic poetry and plays. And he presented them to Marx's daughter. And he said, this stuff shouldn't see the light of day. I mean, this is bad. I mean, this is really damning. And a communist with some integrity, was it David Rizanov, with the Marx Engels Institute in the 1920s, found all of it and said, no, for the sake of, we need to put this stuff out there so people know what Marx believed. So he actually found it, first published it. It's untouched until Robert Payne mentions it, late 1960s, early 1970s. Paul Johnson wrote about it in Intellectuals. Pastor Richard Wormbrand, who was tortured in the Romanian prison of Pitești, wrote a book called Marx and Satan. He wrote about it. But all the other Marx biographers, they just ignore it. They completely ignore it. So Marx has sex with Lenchen behind Jenny's back, and she got pregnant. Now, Robert Payne says that he thinks that the sex might have been non-consensual, that it could have been rape, but I don't know how he would know that. But either way, Lenchen got pregnant. Marx refused to admit that the child was his. Everybody knew the child was his. Jenny knew it. In fact, Jenny was crushed. I mean, her heart was broken. She never really forgave her husband for this. The child, Friedrich Engels, steps up. Now, the Marx family gets most of their money at this point from Engels. Engels becomes the Marx family's sugar daddy. I mean, he's not just a partner with Marx. Engels inherited all this money from his wealthy industrialist father's inheritance. And so he subsidizes not just Karl, but the Marx family. So Engels, who doesn't believe in marriage, all right, these guys were against marriage long before anybody else was. Engels has various women that he shacks up with, which in that day is really unusual. I mean, that was scandalous. You didn't live with a woman that you weren't married to. And a lot of these women wanted Engels, Friedrich, to marry them, make honest women out of them. One of them died, and Engels was really crushed by it, really brokenhearted. Marx writes him a letter, and he kind of acknowledges Engels' loss in the first couple sentences, and then he gets straight to the point of asking for more money. Engels just raged back in a letter. Even my bourgeois friends showed more compassion and interest than you did. But the point of Lenchen, so Engels doesn't care about his reputation. Everyone knows he doesn't believe in marriage. So he steps forward. Helen Demuth, Lenchen, gives birth to this baby boy, and Engels says, I'll accept paternity. Let's give him the name Friedrich. So the son is known as Freddie. Marx never acknowledges his existence, never acknowledges that it's his kid. Of course, never gives him a penny, just like he never gave a penny to Lenchen. And by the way, that poor kid, Freddie, ended up surviving all the Marx family. Marx, of the 6 kids he and Jenny had, 4 of them died before they did, he and Jenny. And then the 2 girls that survived both committed suicide in suicide pacts with their husbands and by drinking poison. And as you noticed in the Marx poetry, a recurring theme in all of his poetry is about the couples coming together, the one, the pale maiden, which sounds like a late-night B-movie horror flick, this pale maiden. She drinks hemlock, she commits suicide, lovers committing suicide and suicide pacts. That's how Marx's 2 daughters died. But the family, it was a complete wreck. The house was in complete disarray. It was dirty. The landlords would kick them out. The landlords would cut off the heat. Marx suffered from boils, carbuncles, which Paul Johnson, the late British historian, said, people don't consider this, but Das Kapital is kind of this long, agonizing, painful to read work. Marx's carbuncles on his bottom were at their worst when he was writing Das Kapital. He had them on his private parts, on his penis, to the point where they would sometimes set him into these into outbursts of rage. He wrote one letter to Engels. He said, I have this boil between my upper lip and my nose. It's like the devil has been hurling excrement at me. Use the word S-H-I-T. But he suffered, and the doctors tried to figure out, boy, why does Marx have all these boils and carbuncles? No one else in that home seems to have them. Well, the answer is he wouldn't bathe. The guy refused to bathe. Mao Zedong refused to bathe. Some of these communists were like this. But he was a very disordered individual at so many different areas of his life. No Marx's views on race, especially toward black people. I mean, he had hideous views toward black people, all stuff that should get him canceled. I don't believe in canceling anybody, but the things that the left is willing to cancel this or that American figure on because of maybe a statement about race or somebody owned slaves. I mean, what Marx said about black people is unbelievable. You'll be reading letters in German between Marx and Engels, and all of a sudden the N-word pops up. You know, the American, English racial epithet. N-I-G-G. It's not like the German word for Negro or black. It's like, oh, look at that. And they were, in fact, his daughter was married to a guy named Paul Lafargue, who was, I guess, partly Cuban to some degree. And Marx and Engels are sitting there trying to figure out in a letter, deducing with scientific accuracy how much N-word blood is in his vein. They called him Negrillo, the gorilla. And they made fun of him because he was black. And there's a letter from Engels to Marx's daughter. It's just something like, oh, I hear he's running for office in this district in Paris. Well, it contains a zoo. As somebody who's, he should be a perfect representative of that district, being somebody who's just closer to the apes and the monkeys than we are. Ferdinand Lassalle, who they refer to as the Jewish N-word, they're looking at his cranial capacity and all kinds of, so I mean, very, very racist. If Patrisse Cullors, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, who calls herself a Marxist, knew what Marx said about race, she'd probably call herself, I don't know, maybe a communist, but she probably shouldn't call herself a Marxist.
He traced all the way back to the story of Kane and Abel, because Kane and Abel is the first victim-victimizer narrative. Right. And Cain feels that he's the victim of Abel. Yeah. And he is driven by a bitter resentment.
By the way, envy, which is what Marxism is all about.
Absolutely. And he becomes extremely hostile. Okay, so
that's the chief virtue of Marxism.
Imagine that Marxism is essentially a retelling of the story of Cain and Abel, with Cain as the protagonist. Okay, so once you get that, then you can see what's happened with the modern meta-Marxists. Because we might think, being slightly older, we might think that the core doctrine of Marxism is economic inequality, but it's not. The core doctrine is victim-victimizer.
That's right.
Now, what Marx said was the prime dimension of victim-victimizer is economic.
It's the rational reason why anybody, if you just read the Communist Manifesto, it's so clear that this is completely impractical. It can't possibly work. I think there's almost a kind of a diabolical explanation for this. Ronald Reagan said, in the grand destiny of humanity, we are not matters of mere material computation, right? When great forces are on the foot in the world, we learn that we are spirits, not animals, right? I think there's almost a spiritual explanation behind this.
Right. So you think
it doesn't make mere rational sense that this idea could have ever been fostered or caught on. I think there's a diabolical explanation.
Right. So you basically believe that the Marxist phenomena cannot be understood outside an overarching religious interpretation.
I think so,
I think that's right.
And we haven't mentioned the very opening words of the manifesto. A specter is haunting you. The Spector of Communism.
No kidding.
Yeah, and it says all the old allies of Europe, Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, German and French radicals and German spies, have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise the specter.
Yeah.
Marx and Engels opened the book with a paragraph describing it as a specter, a demonic specter that needs exorcise. Now again, they're being playful with words.
Yeah, right.
No, there's too much of this. Yeah. There's too much of this. There's something deeper and darker.
The neo-Marxists nowadays have infiltrated every aspect and career field in society. Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, Kamala Harris's VP pick and running mate. Looks like a normal high school teacher and coach. Tampon Timmy took the long march, that is for certain. These two didn't fall from the coconut tree, they fell from the communist tree.
San Francisco was a very important figure in Kamala Harris's early life in politics. He was her much older lover. There was like a gap of 30 years. She started seeing him in her late 20s. When she was an up-and-coming prosecutor, he lavished her with gifts. He gave her a BMW. He invited her to the Oscars. They went to Paris together. And most importantly, he made introductions in that world of democratic politics. Willie Brown definitely took credit for helping her career and putting her on the path of this meteoric rise, this greatness, if you will. He helped her in her campaign to be the district attorney of San Francisco. Later on, she would go on to be the attorney general of California, and she held that position twice. He was an incredibly important figure in her career.
I am one of two daughters of parents who met when they were active in the civil rights movement as graduate students at the University of California, Berkeley in the 60s, the 1960s. So for my sister and me, that meant that we grew up pretty much surrounded full-time by adults who spent their time marching and shouting about this thing called justice. So for me, I often tell this story, but growing up, the heroes of that movement in my mind and many minds were the architects of the civil rights movement. And they, of course, were the lawyers. So it was Charles Hamilton Houston and Constance Baker Motley and Thurgood Marshall, who were doing the very important work of taking the skill of this great profession of law and translating the passion in the streets to the courtrooms of our country. A child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This system is not working for the African American community. I can tell you as the chief law enforcement officer for a major city in this country that it is not working. We see that in the statistics that you've outlined. 2 million people are in the prison system in this country. Over 40% are African American, in spite of the fact that we only constitute 13% of the general population. It's not working. It's not working when we recognize that African American men, the leading cause of their death is homicide. We are overly represented both as victims and as defendants and as witnesses. Our communities suffer because our babies hear the gunfire every night, so the 7-year-old has post-traumatic stress disorder and cannot go to school the next day and learn. The criminal justice system is not working for us. When a person commits another crime, I have to spend $10,000 to try that felony. They sit in my county jail for $35,000 a year. I'm running a reentry program out of my office in the San Francisco DA's office that brings folks back into the community at an expense of $8,000 a year, guarantees them employment, guarantees them meaningful reunification with their family, and in that way, fulfills my responsibility to keep my community safe. So let's redefine this issue in the context of public safety and just simply talk about doing crime prevention, investing in people coming out of prisons is the smart thing to do for law enforcement.
38-year-old Kamala Harris came out of nowhere and was swept into office as San Francisco's district attorney. And as she did, she made history. She's the first woman ever to be the city's top prosecutor. And she is the first African American in such a job ever in the state of California. Kamala Harris was born in Oakland, raised in Berkeley. Her parents were both professors involved in the civil rights movement. Her father African American, her mother Eastern Indian. Politics decidedly liberal, though she ran to the right of Hallinan, who could be the most liberal DA in America. Both are against the death penalty, support medical marijuana, want juveniles steered away from adult courts except in the most serious cases. She went after Hallinan on his low conviction rate.
Kamala Harris has said that her conviction rate is going to be higher. We have about 25,000 cases a year, and so it'll be interesting to see how she proposes to do that without destroying any of the diversion programs which allows a person to participate in counseling in lieu of jail.
Most important things don't come easy.
A million years, I would have thought that they were going to charge me for Saul's murder. I never talked to no detective, no police officer, no DA, nobody.
Just arrested and then charged?
Arrested and charged, that's it.
Was the first time you saw Kamala Harris in person the day that the verdict was issued?
She showed up at the two most pivotal times in this first trial, and me being convicted and me being sentenced. She wanted to be present for a celebration of a conviction.
That's what it felt like, celebration?
A celebration, that's what it felt like. The reactions I get when I tell people my story is, they say it's the worst nightmare. You know, it's the closest thing to dying.
Jamal, I'm going to read you a quote real quick. The job of a progressive prosecutor is to look out for those overlooked, to speak up for those whose voices aren't being heard, to see and address the causes of crime, not just their consequences, and to shine a light on the inequality and unfairness that lead to injustice. It is to recognize that not everyone needs punishment, that what many need, quite obviously, is help. Kamala Harris wrote that in her book, The Truths We Hold. Does that sound consistent with the kind of with the brand of justice that you saw administered by offices that she was running?
It definitely sounds like Kamala Harris right now as a senator, but at the time of her being the head district attorney of San Francisco, that is almost polar opposite of what I felt and what our community felt in San Francisco.
Later, California Assembly Speaker Willie Brown, who she once dated, kickstarted her political career, appointing her to the State Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board and later to the California Medical Assistance Commission, something Willie Brown would later admit helped her career. In an op-ed titled, "Sure, I dated Kamala Harris, so what?" After being recruited as assistant DA in San Francisco, she later ran for top spot at the office, taking on her boss Terrence Hallinan and winning 56% of the vote.
The district attorney from San Francisco, Kamala Harris.
But it was only 4 months into her tenure when Isaac Espinoza, a San Francisco police officer, was fatally shot by a man wielding an AK-47. Her handling of his murder case would reverberate throughout her career.
I felt like she had just taken something from us. She had just taken justice from us, from Isaac.
Did she call you?
No, she never called me.
Fast forward to 2010 and Kamala Harris would face her toughest challenge yet, winning over Californians to become the Attorney General. A race so close that Republican candidate Steve Cooley wouldn't concede until more than 3 weeks after Election Day.
In the coming 4 years, and in the continuing work of the Attorney General's office, we are going to do whatever it takes.
And then, in 2016, with the support of President Obama and Vice President Biden, Harris became a U.S. Senator. Following her victory, she promised to protect immigrants from the policies of President-elect Donald Trump.
Once known as the most left-wing person in the Senate, she supported open borders, a ban on fracking, 2 things she has since flip-flopped on, but still stands firm on a woman's right to an abortion.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Her work against then-President Trump would continue throughout her tenure.
Trump has shown us through his words and actions that he thinks he is above the law.
In 2020, she would have a significant role in the impeachment trial of Donald Trump, then attempt to battle him for highest office in the land by launching a presidential bid of her own. Raising $1.5 million in the first 24 hours, Harris was considered a top contender for the Democratic nominee. But not for long. A campaign in shambles, staff departures, bad debate performances, and a media showing no mercy. Harris would withdraw 10 months later, citing financial struggles. Fast forward to today.
She's the presidential nominee with not a lot to run on, drafting off legislation and proposed policies from the man she's hoping to succeed. She's calling for expanding the child tax credit, proposed $40 billion in tax incentives for new housing construction, and endorsed a federal ban on price gouging, though she offered very few details on how it would actually work.
Kamala has to show to Democrats that she can beat Trump. The goal is to beat Trump.
Kamala Harris raised $81 million in the first 24 hours, a new presidential donation record. But is a fat bank balance enough to beat Donald Trump? Only time will tell. Sarah Williamson, Newsmax.
Joined today by over 100 Republican leaders from across Pennsylvania and across our country who are supporting my candidacy for President of the United States. And I am deeply honored to have their support. Some power to chart a new way forward, one that is worthy of this magnificent country that we are all blessed to call home.
Nowadays, nobody trusts Kamala. Is it the shady days of B&DA? Or over 300,000 migrant kids missing and sold into sex slavery? We sure don't trust these rhinos. One thing the rhino globalists and communists have in common is they love actively trying to destroy America. This is why no one trusts the Uniparty, the deep state.
What the hell you doing over there in them blinds, man? You been over here all day long. I'm watching this van. This van's been here for like a week now. It's watching us. Well, you crazy, man. There ain't nobody watching you. Your life boring as hell.
When it comes to the government, I'm not trusting it. Heard they serving Kool-Aid, but I don't want none of it. I don't like Democrats, I don't trust Republicans. Middle fingers up, that's what I got for government.
Gonna sound crazy, but I'm still gonna say this. I believe the secret agents got me under surveillance. They've been watching me lately, and I'm mad they can do it. All cause Facebook and Google keep on tracking my movements. The whole world's gotten sketchy, I don't trust nobody. People probably think hide and seek must be my hobby. I'm always staying in the house as much as I can. I haven't lived in days now, all because of that van. I don't understand why they keep spying on me. They got satellites and drones, so I'm not trying to leave. FBI popping up like paparazzi, didn't say healthy. Got my picture taken as much as Taylor Swift and Jason Kelsey. No promotion for Pfizer, don't matter what they paying. If taking the shot got Taylor naked, I'm still not vaccinating. Maybe that's the reason for the label that they gave me. They can't manipulate me, which makes the deep state angry. I ain't slept in 5 days, I'm too paranoid to sleep. Pay attention to what I say, be careful when you speak. Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant, all they do is listen. Soon their computer's predictions gonna get you put in prison.
When it comes to the government, I'm not trusting it. Heard they serving Kool-Aid, but I don't want none of it. I don't like Democrats, I don't trust Republicans. Middle fingers up, that's what I got for government.
I went to jail for 3 days for forgetting a traffic ticket, while Jeffrey Epstein had airplanes trafficking children. I couldn't log into my Facebook without showing ID. You don't gotta have one to place a vote for who leads. I reckon it's elections technology's affected the most. Disagree with their policies, they're suppressing your posts. What's with Zuckerberg? Not like he's got a dog in the fight. 400 million donated to candidates, and they're not on the right. What happened to America? I swear it's embarrassing. Memes you're seen sharing will get you comparisons to terrorists. Fair and objective, these are now ideas of the past. I fear that their objectives are about to steer us to a crash. I keep hearing the crap that they spew on the news. Cheering for Democrats is all the fools usually do. What happened to telling the truth and sticking to facts? Biden appears hella confused, but they keep kissing his ass. I haven't slept much lately, it's gotten tough to relax. The way the country's been changing, this is not gonna last. They're giving out bunches of cash to push their agendas, while our futures are stuck in the grasp of crooks in November.
When it comes to the government, I'm not trusting it. Heard they serving Kool-Aid, but I don't want none of it. I don't like Democrats, I don't trust Republicans. Middle fingers up, that's what I got for government.
Hey, Gunpowder, we can hear after work. I need to go to the store too. Nah, man, I ain't going nowhere, man. You see that van out there? That van's watching us. I mean, they're on to us. I'm telling you right now, I'm not going nowhere, man. I'm staying right here in the house. Boy, you ain't left the house in 2 weeks. You tripping, man. Boring ass life and shit. Ain't nobody watching you, motherfucker.
Decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it. We recognized that in that initiative, as a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick.
Children didn't show up to class, so the parents ended up in handcuffs. Local law enforcement hopes it sends a strong message to parents to get involved in their child's lives. Well, tonight, KCRA3's Leticia Ordaz spoke with some mothers who spent the day behind bars.
My son is in a charter school program, and they still arrested me.
Tonight, this mother who would not give us her name was released after spending the entire day locked up at the Sacramento County Jail.
How did you feel, though, to be arrested today? It's degrading, it's humiliating, it's harassment.
Today, 100 officers throughout Sacramento joined forces with the district attorney's office to arrest nearly 40 parents who had warrants for not sending their children to school. It's a message this parent got quickly.
The film, and I saw the press conference at the time that Kamala Harris did, in which she said the state was losing over $1 billion a year in federal funds because of truancy rates, and that she was going to remedy that by putting the parents of truant kids in jail, of kids who did not show up for school, to put them in prison and send out a message. And you were one of the first people to actually encounter that new policy. So what happened to you?
So basically, my daughter was born in 2002 with a traumatic, terminally ill condition called sickle cell. We were taking care of her all the way through the time. I had what you call a 504 plan in place, which is a federal document to allow disabled children to have accommodations in the classroom so they can continue their education in the classroom. I had a formal meeting with the school 12 days before they submitted my name to the district attorney for them to submit me for truancy. In March of 2013, unaware to my knowledge, a knock at the door, and they came in and arrested me for truancy, even having federal documents in place to allow her to have special accommodations. They knew about her sickle cell anemia. They were aware of everything with her medical condition, her medical needs. It was very difficult for me to maintain her school attendance. Her 504 plan state it as such, and to be criminalized for it and not to receive the educational support are social workers. Instead, I was arrested under Kamala Harris' strict truancy policies when she served as Attorney General here in the state of California. And because of my arrest, I lost my home, my job, my livelihood. It made me homeless and pushed me deeper into crisis. Despite Kamala Harris' current rhetoric about her commitment to Black women and families, this, in my case, exemplifies how her policies has criminalized instead of support.
And actually, the police, when they came to arrest you at your home, say what they said to you.
Go talk to Kamala Harris. Investigation, they sent investigators to my house. And I was just so confused on why would they send investigators instead of community support, social workers, but investigators to criminalize me and my daughter. I'm not a gang member. I wasn't ever associated with gangs, nor did I sell drugs, or neither to frame my child to be a gang member. Is ridiculous. I was too busy trying to care for my daughter, to ensure her education, to ensure her health care. I need her to live, not to kill her. And that's exactly what the school was doing. They was trying to kill my child.
Donald J. Harris is Kamala's father. Donald Harris was a Marxist professor at Stanford. According to Mr. Harris, in his own writings, he is a descendant of Hamilton Brown, a Jamaican slave owner. Kamala's family were not the slaves working the field. They were the slave drivers whipping the slaves. Waltz was picked because he is a radical Marxist. Waltz is as commie as they come.
Tim Walz signed an executive order providing legal protection to those who come to Minnesota for gender-affirming health care.
It had all the trappings of a bill signing ceremony. A huge crowd of lawmakers, advocates, and families, in this case, gathered in support of legal protections for people seeking gender-affirming care for themselves or their children. But the paper Governor Walz signed was an executive order.
Tampons, the tampon law. Public schools provide menstrual products for free in girls' and boys' bathrooms, grades 4 to 12. There are a lot of things the government can do or should be doing, roads, bridges, schools, but not going into the bathrooms. He endorsed and got a lot of help from on this law.
Not all students who menstruate are female. We need to make sure that all students have access to these products. There are obviously less non-female menstruating students, and therefore their usage will be much lower. And that was actually calculated into the cost of this and how much we decided to fund it. And so we do not expect that the non-female menstruating students will use these products as much as the students using female bathrooms, but it's important to have them there.
He's really into illegal aliens doing whatever the hell they want, and he's going to make it easier for them.
Today, Governor Tim Walz signed the Driver's License for All bill into law. This will allow all Minnesotans to get a driver's license regardless of immigration status.
It's done.
A packed room at the St. Paul Armory erupted after the governor's signature made driver's license for all the law of the land.
Tampon Timmy is a member of the United Front, a communist front group.
China connection? What is up with Tim and China? This is really, really bizarre. So he's a teacher in, Kansas or Nebraska, someplace like that, and he's obsessed with China. It doesn't really make all that much sense. To go to China, how many times? Let's put it up. Let's go through some of these things. 30 trips to China since 1993, and he was doing some of this stuff as an 8th grade social studies teacher. The trips, people who have looked at this, undoubtedly sponsored in part by the Communist Party of China. You couldn't conduct this kind of visitation without the Communist Party's approval. And Waltz claimed the trips at one point were affiliated with Harvard University. That is not true. He may have had 2 Harvard University grad students along for the ride, but that doesn't mean it was sponsored by Harvard or in any way officially affiliated with Harvard. Keep going with this stuff. Tim in China. Waltz chose June 4th for his wedding day because it coincided with the Tiananmen Square massacre. He's actually talked about this. He wanted to not forget his wedding day, so he took one of the most notorious days in human history. Let's get married on that date. It's not like getting married on July 4th, right? Tiananmen was a totally different deal. What else? When he was in China with these kids, he urged the students to downplay their Americanness, which kind of totally goes against the whole idea of an exchange program. I did an exchange program once. You're you're an ambassador for your country. You want to learn about the other side too, but you also want to play up who you are and tell people about it. You don't downplay it. What kind of exchange program was this? And it is said, and there's been a lot of reporting on this, that while overseas, to the students who were there, he extolled the virtues of communism. Isn't this nice? They share everything. Yeah, they share. Call it share, Tim. Oh boy, I can't wait for this debate now. Waltz, it's believed, may have been a target of elite capture. This kind of like a seduction program. Not physical seduction, but they target people from the West, win them over. Somehow win them over. They might be doing this wittingly or unwittingly. They have a whole program, it's called 863, that is targeted to get civilians from the West thinking in communist terms.
Now, I happen to be and understand a little about China and lived in China and speak Chinese. I'm pretty friendly with China.
Fostering cooperation amongst people in China and the United States on their own, understanding that these are the things that tie us together.
So I don't fall into the category that China necessarily needs to be an adversarial relationship.
Please remember to practice social distancing and wear a mask as you celebrate. Gong hei fa zoi.
Great to see you. This is pretty incredible.
Thank you so much.
To see Tim Walz's relationship over the years with the CCP. James Comer writes this: the CCP has sought to destroy the United States through coordinated influence and infiltration campaigns that target every aspect of American life. And we want to know details of the governor's longstanding connections to the Chinese Communist Party, the entities in that letter to Christopher Wray. What do you know about Tim Walz's connections to Communist China?
Well, certainly as governor and as a representative, he had a long series of connections with the United Front Work Department groups, including the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, which is a front organization of the United Front Work Department of the Communist Party, which is a part of the party that is basically tasked with penetrating foreign governments and bringing them down. Also, when Tim Walz had that business, if we can call it that, of taking high school students to China, that would have had to been approved by the United Front Work Department because it would be a very sensitive matter. So he's got close connections with some of the most dangerous elements in the Chinese party state.
Don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Way before Clinton, Biden, Obama, or Harris, they were just mere vessels of the Spectre. As we have detailed in this documentary, the communists clearly have infiltrated the Democrat Party. According to Frank Marshall Davis' unclassified FBI documents, April of 1950, a subversive element were concentrating their efforts, infiltrating the Democrat Party.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. Destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. And he said there's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. This is a man who said to his 19-year-old son, "There is no foundation like the rock of honesty and fairness. And when you begin to build your life on that rock, with the cement of the faith in God that you have, then you have a real start." You and I have the courage to tell our elected officials that we want our national policy based on what we know in our hearts is morally right. The Socialist Party ticket said he would stop the advance of socialism in the United States. I think that's exactly what he will do. Former Democrat, I can tell you Norman Thomas isn't the only man who has drawn this parallel to socialism with the present administration. Because back in 1936, Mr. Democrat himself, Al Smith, the great American, came before the American people and charged that the leadership of his party was taking the party of Jefferson, Jackson, and Cleveland down the road under the banners of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. And he walked away from his party and he never returned till the day he died. Because to this day, the leadership of that party has been taking that party, that honorable party, down the road in the image of the Labour Socialist Party of England. Now, it doesn't require expropriation or confiscation of private property or business to impose socialism on a people. What does it mean whether you hold the deed to or the title to your business or property if the government holds the power of life and death over that business or property? And such machinery already exists. The government can find some charge to bring against any concern it chooses to prosecute. The businessman has his own tale of harassment. Somewhere a perversion has taken place. Our natural unalienable rights are now considered to be a dispensation of government. And freedom has never been so fragile, so close to slipping from our grasp as it is at this moment.
Bullets were flying over us, yet I felt serene. Blood pouring everywhere, and yet in a certain way I felt very safe because I had God on my side. Do something to let him know I was okay. I raised my right arm, looked at the thousands and thousands of people that were breathlessly waiting, and started shouting, "Fight, fight, fight."
With all the hatred they have spewed at President Trump, it was only a matter of time before somebody tried to kill him. And that's exactly what happened, not just here in Butler, Pennsylvania, but just a few weeks later in Florida.
Returned to Butler in the aftermath of tragedy and heartache to deliver a simple message to the people of Pennsylvania and to the people of America. Our movement to make America great again stands stronger, prouder, more united, more determined, and nearer to victory than ever before. We're going to make America great again. An assassin aimed to silence me and to silence the greatest movement, MAGA. The hand of providence and the grace of God, that villain did not succeed in his goal. Never quit, I will never bend, I will never break, I will never yield, not even in the face of death itself. Make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America healthy again. We will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. We will make America safe again. And we will make America great again.
You don't have to like it, we don't need to agree. But the freedom to speak is what it means to be free. No, we won't be quiet, we're about to get loud. Try keeping us silent, fuck around and find out. You don't have to like it, we don't need to agree. But the freedom to speak is what it means to be free. No, we won't be quiet, we're about to get loud. Try keeping us silent, fuck around and find out. The First Amendment's what made speaking a basic freedom. The second may be the main reason that we're able to keep it. They're always trying to take them both, it's becoming annoying. But all they'll get from this voyage is a bunch of disappointment. I'm enjoying showing that I'm not giving up easy. I be steady holding back like I'm stuck in a wheelie. You're offended, then quit listening, this is plenty fair enough. Infringe on the rights we've been given and we tearing shit up. I swear you messed up, guess what, we're not taking it now. The government answers to us, not the other way around. I'm a free-thinking human being, never bowing to tyranny. Do I need to repeat it to remove any doubts of you hearing me? I'm a free-thinking human being, you about to be fearing me. Any rumors of me bowing out, it's bound to be conspiracy. If I'm viewed to be down, you must have found 1,000 spears in me. The only thing you hear about it is how I went out without fearing me. You don't have to like it, we don't need to agree. But the freedom to speak is what it means to be free. No, we won't be quiet, oh, we're about to get loud. Try keeping us silent, fuck around and find out. You don't have to like it, we don't need to agree. But the freedom to speak is what it means to be free. No, we won't be quiet, we're about to get loud. Try keeping us silent, fuck around and find out. What happened to journalism nowadays is non-existent. I'm sure there'd be a major take propagandist position. Every word they say, rest assured that it's laced with bias. The media's became blatant liars, getting paid to divide us. Ain't no way to deny it, it's so dang obviously dishonest. The way they're basically non-stop plotting against the audience. Of course they're more so shown to be puppets of Soros than any form of being close to some sort of pundits with morals. Formerly known as the news, now a state-supported portal where manipulation and lies have became par for course normal. If you don't play along with the narrative, you're labeled a deplorable, while our way of life in America's became unaffordable. It's horribly immoral to keep on speaking these lies day after day. What they're doing, spreading disease of the mind. Never sell my soul, I'd rather keep a hold of my honor. Behold a free man on whom your attempts to control have all faltered. You don't have to like it, we don't need to agree. But the freedom to speak is what it means to be free. No, we won't be quiet, oh, we're about to get loud. Try keeping us silent, fuck around and find out. You don't have to like it, we don't need to agree. But the freedom to speak is what it means to be free. No, we won't be quiet, we're about to
Kamala, you're fired. Get out, get out. You're fired.